What?
She said she had no friends.
Oh.
You're going to Germany? What's up, Emily?
Everybody keeps asking me that. Y'all are serious.
Okay, well, I'm not everybody, because I didn't know
No, I'm just saying in general.
Okay, so it is 5 o'clock, and we're going to start the instruction work group. And so the first item of business is the announcement regarding the 2019 Student Senate election results. I am, before I announce that, I want to say that this is actually Ahmad's last meeting. And I want to thank him for his contributions, his thoughtfulness, the time he puts into this, his commitment to representing student voice on the school board. And I'd like to ask everyone to join me in a round of applause and thank him. And so it's going to be my commitment tonight, even though we don't have any votes, to ask for his advisory comments maybe, because it was always my greatest regret as board president that I neglected to always turn and ask Ahmad for his advisory vote. And Ahmad, it was never because I wasn't interested. I just almost considered you much more of a regular board member than just an advisory member. So the election for MMSD Student Senate President and Board Representative took place the week of May 20th to the 24th. The Student Senate President position for the upcoming 2019-20 school year will be held by Rebecca Cutforth, a current junior at James Madison Memorial High School. The Student Senate School Board Representative will be held by Annika Sanyal, current sophomore at James Madison Memorial High School. The board would like to express its gratitude to Morton Lee, outgoing Student Senate President, and Ahmad Saeed, outgoing Student Board Representative, for their intelligent and thoughtful leadership and dedicated service to MMSD Student Senate. The board congratulates Rebecca and Annika on their elections and sends the best regards to Morton and Ahmad as they pursue their ambitious post-secondary goals. Okay, that's good. Okay, next on the agenda is public appearances. Barb, do we have no registrations this evening? Okay, then next is our Schools of Hope elementary and middle school partnership renewals. And so this is a discussion and presentation. Who do we have, Jen?
Yep,
Who's going to be
Astra is
presenting?
joining us, and Lisa will be her co-pilot in this meeting. And I think we're also going to have a few partners join us. Is that right, Astra?
I'm going to acknowledge, just want to introduce
when-
and acknowledge them.
When the time comes.
Yeah, when
Let
the
me-
time comes.
Let me just say a few quick words then
Sure.
to kick it off for Astra. Tonight we're going to be discussing our major tutoring partnerships. Is generally how we categorize them, which is incredibly important, right? We depend on our teachers to provide direct instruction to students, but we also depend on this larger network of adults who wrap around our students, which is incredibly important. They provide caring adult relationships, which are hard to measure, and we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. While ultimately we're looking for academic results, these tutoring partnerships play a really important role in developing students' non-cognitive skills, which is essential for student success, not only in school K-12, but in life after school. And we'll be talking about that a little bit tonight. As a reminder, we have a small set of high-intensity partnerships. These partnerships go through every 3-year deep review. We're going to be looking at the results of that evaluation process tonight, and those evaluation results flow into the new MOAs that are rewritten, which is what you're going to be approving later this month, the MOAs for each of those high-intensity partnerships. So with that said,
Great.
let Astra walk you through it.
So, hello everyone. This is my first time appearing before the new board. So, good hello and good congratulations. I know some of you from outside of this process and this body, but grateful to be here. I'm Astra Iyukumare, as Jen said. I'm the director of strategic partnerships for the district, and I was also known as the new Jessica Hankey. So, and Lisa Quistad, who is going to talk a little bit as I present these few slides to you, an overview of the tutorial partnerships. I want to acknowledge very quickly in the room our tutoring partners, Dr. Ruben Anthony and Ed Lee from Urban League, who they are partnered with us around Middle Schools of Hope. Where's the Elementary Schools of Hope people? Hi, guys, back there, and Karen and Evelyn from Centro Hispano. So thanks, and WCER folks here as well. So ahead of our time today, I did send you all, or through Ricardo, sent you all some documents. So you got all the reports, you got all the tutoring evaluation report, and you have copies of the MOA. So my intent today is really to just take you through an overview of the different programs, very brief, and some successes. We believe we have a lot of successes and wins and a few challenges, and what we are framing as opportunities that we've incorporated into the MOAs. So as Jen said earlier, our focus today is really to get you as much orientation to the programs that you're going to be approving as for renewal for another 3 years. Okay, any other thoughts, Lisa?
No, I would just say that we know you have a lot on your plate tonight, and that Astra will be giving you a high-level summary of the MOA, and just a reminder that the MOA certainly doesn't define every single thing we do with our really important partners, but it certainly defines our intent to ways of working and our commitment to work with our really valued partners. So, yeah, Astra, take it away.
Okay, so moving to the first slide. Do I have control? Is this it?
You do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it this one? Okay, this one.
Yeah.
All right. So, as I mentioned before, we have Juventud Escalera, which is our partnership with Centro Hispano, Middle Schools of Hope with primary partner with Urban League of Greater Madison, and Elementary Schools of Hope, which is a partnership with United Way of Dane County, and our wonderful partners through AmeriCorps. I just want to give you a quick overview. These are all long-term partnerships. These are partnerships that we rely on and value for lots of reasons, not just academic, but as for support, general holistic support of the youth that are engaged in these programs. So Juventud Escalera is a culturally relevant leadership development program. Its main focus is to targeted primarily at Latino youth, but from 6th through 12th grade. So the Juventud program is the middle school component, and the Escalera program is the high school component. As the slide says, the Juventud is currently in Senate, Sherman, Toki, Wright, in Wright Middle School. Escalera is in East and West High School and will soon, is in the process of being expanded to La Follette. So we are excited. La Follette is excited for the expansion as well. Really, the purpose is to support, is to improve Latino educational trajectory, and to do that in a holistic way through wraparound services and incorporating the academic component. Middle Schools of Hope is also a longstanding partnership. It's also focused on tutoring and coaching. And I'm blind, so I have to look at my paper down here, guys. So, it is currently in Black Hawk, Cherokee, Jefferson, O'Keefe, Senate, Sherman, Toki, Whitehorse, and Wright. So it's a middle school program, as the title says. It's really focused on high school readiness. So, and Middle Schools of Hope, Urban League was kind enough to partner with us in an innovative exercise around engaging our innovation team, Rocket, who I think we heard from at the last board meeting, if you recall, from Lee. And they are, we have a pilot that we're planning on launching with them in partnership to explore a different model of support and tutoring services delivery to students. So we're really excited about that. And then finally, Elementary Schools of Hope, which is evidence-based tutoring interventions. And the goal is really to focus on literacy improvement, I think math improvement from K-5 through 5th grade. The AmeriCorps tutors are, members are the tutors that deliver, and they are targeting enrollment and delivery and services. So moving on to what we, so what I've tried to do is frame overview of the partnerships. Now I'm going to get into the successes, and these are successes that really transcend all of the tutoring partnerships. They're all reflected in the MOAs as well. So I just want to highlight, I want to emphasize caring relationships. I think that is often overlooked and undervalued in these types of partnerships, and it's why I think they have stood the test of time in terms of their being around and surviving through so many years with the district. The program participation is high, and is you know, the students are engaged, and they're liking the engagement, the experience of in all of these partnerships. So we think that's important. We think it is linked to caring, just that whole idea of having caring adult relationships invested in their success in school. MMSD, the tutoring framework that is evidence-based that the district has, is all of the tutors are trained on that framework, and there's alignment, strong alignment. There's a positive perception in the schools as far as social emotional outcomes with the students and non-cognitive outcomes. So we see those as wins. We also think that the staff perception is well organized. These programs are well organized. They're culturally relevant. So equity is laced and infused in the work of these programs, in the structure of these programs. There's quality tutoring strategies, as I mentioned before. They're coordinated well with the schools, and they always actively seek feedback as part of constantly leaning into improvement. So, and that's part of the tutoring evaluation report as well. That's all reflected in there. So there are, with any relationship, I like to call partnerships relationships, so you might see me use that interchangeably. There are some challenges that we continue to work on. There's some mixed outcomes as far as attendance, overall attendance, and academic achievement of the participants, and there's lots of reasons for that. Part of it is the data limitations, so we don't have good ways to capture impact. And Lisa, feel free to weigh in here as I talk through this. MAP, for example, is a limited measure. It's not a great way to measure supplemental programming.
Just like when we were at the table talking about summer school for the past number of years together, right, we realized that MAP had pretty limited utility there, and we ended up going with a more sensitive curriculum-based measure to measure growth and progress, so that's something that we'll talk about in just a little bit here.
Yes.
But we're fully aware that that really sort of has limited utility when it comes to measuring progress and growth.
Yeah. Also, one of the challenges has been a disconnect between balancing the school-specific needs, which can be a challenge when you're dealing with 50 different schools, and partnership capacity. So aligning the district priorities versus the school needs is an ongoing issue. It's just a balancing act, quite frankly. And just always trying to work out bi-directional communication in the school environment. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for those of us in the district. So we can imagine it's a challenge for our partners who are partnering with us from an external position. So we've identified some opportunities from also informed by the evaluation. These have all been built in and incorporated into the MOA as well. So those opportunities are looking for ways to continually assess the school needs and reacting to that, adjusting to those needs. Identifying meaningful and attainable outcomes. We've done that through just with the outcomes. If you read the outcomes, we think they're reasonable and attainable. Mapping promising practices and adopting a more integrated way of working. So really being intentional from the beginning to the end, linking arms in how we partner together, how we work together, not just this is what you do, this is what you do, and let's all break and meet when it comes time to evaluate. So just being more intentional about how we link arms and how we work together. And as Lisa mentioned earlier, just this idea of identifying and implementing a targeted curriculum-based measure of impact. And I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that right now, if you want me to get through the slide.
I'll let you get through
Okay.
the slides, and then I'll jump in.
Okay.
Whatever.
And so we also, and then finally, there's an opportunity for identifying and implementing a social emotional development assessing tool. So at the pre point and at the post point. So those are some opportunities that were teased out and identified in the evaluation and have been incorporated throughout all of the MOAs. And so that's what we're asking you to approve. And we'll take your questions and anything you want to add about the measuring up competencies and all that.
So, as part of a revamp and refresh of our comprehensive assessment system, we wanted to take a closer look at curriculum-based measures, sort of the short probes in specific skill areas that give us really good information about specific needs of students. And we're thinking this would be a good opportunity, just as we had in summer school, to think about trying, for example, in literacy around comprehension and fluency, short probes that tutors can receive training around, and we could incorporate that into tutor training, right? And when then you have data and something to talk about, over time it gives you something to hook on to month by month to talk about the child and where they might be going and how they might be progressing. This particular tool also has a social and emotional screener that goes with it that tutors could use pre and post, and a student who is being tutored, their classroom teacher could use pre and post. So we're talking about how trying something like that might give us some more sensitive data, more finely tuned data around what kids are gaining and what skills they're acquiring as a result of working with tutors. So I will just add that. Yeah.
Are we at a point where this is a good point for questions?
Yeah, we're
Okay,
done.
great. Nikki?
Yep. Thanks, Mary.
Just a quick one. Do we have interpreters, like sighted interpreters if needed, or in case for tutoring, or is that not possible at this time? I know
That's-
it's getting
Yeah, you give me the hard question, right? This is my first time up. I don't know the answer to that. I think it would depend on the school and the program, to be honest with you. But I don't have a definitive answer to that.
Nikki, what's the question again?
I
Can you
just wanna
ask it
know if
again?
you could get an ASL interpreter if needed.
Oh, an ASL interpreter.
For-
I wasn't
yeah, I
sure
know.
exactly what you meant. Laura, do you know?
That hasn't come up yet.
Yeah.
For ESL,
I would
for
imagine
students
so.
that speak another language, we try to recruit
Yeah.
volunteers that speak that language.
Right.
But most of it is, yeah.
Let's find out.
That's a good question, though.
Yeah.
Fair
the-
question.
Yeah, you got
The
it.
resources that the school has, they provide.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
just
you.
curious to
Yeah.
want to make sure.
Is Glendale has got to be one of our Schools of Hope sites, is it?
It is.
Glendale? Okay.
And they-
And that's where our deaf and hard of hearing
Yeah.
program is, so we'll double check and see about how they handle it. But I
Yeah.
would imagine that they would have interpreters available as needed. Thanks, Nikki.
Yeah, Iman?
I had a question on the ways to measure impact. Is do you feel like MAP is like, to what degree do you think is that showing what you wanted to show about the success of the program, and do you think that you would want the new measures to replace that measure or kind of be used along with it?
So I'll take a stab at that. I do think MAP has a place in our district, right? Those are the measures that we use to hold ourselves accountable to our strategic framework goals. I do think that it's not sensitive enough to what's happening in tutoring settings. I think just as our partners, along with the school, try to work hard to identify the students who would benefit the most from tutoring, I think we also owe it to ourselves to determine then what within tutoring do we really want to focus on. And MAP doesn't really have utility for that. So we're talking about something that is more sensitive that tutors can use, that tutors can get information from, just short, quick probes in specific areas, comprehension, fluency, that tutors can learn from, can communicate with students about, and that you can administer over time and see growth, and then adjust your tutoring the next time you get together.
So it would replace MAP, not be in addition
Yeah.
to MAP.
Yeah.
And then one more question. It says on one of the slides that the student selection process is a little different across different schools. Can you talk about that a little bit?
They've been varied. So each program has, in general, this is one of the outcomes of the evaluation that we found, is that it's kind of what it said. So there's not continuity across the schools in terms of selection for participating in the different programs.
And it's not, is it based off of MAP scores for some of the schools or for all the schools? Or is it?
Depends on the
Right, it depends on the school.
It depends on the school.
Program, and depends on the student's schedule. So scheduling is as big of a component. If the student, and it's like Tetris really with then the volunteer schedule coming in and trying to match all of these things together. It just varies. It's every school, every student has a different need and time. So we just try to match those. So that's why it's varied across the board.
Gloria?
Just a quick question on the capacity of tutors. Using AmeriCorps tutors, right? Are we finding that it's a challenge to build the capacity of tutors, right? And then also, have you looked into the future about what, if that capacity is an issue, what we need to do to change it?
So, and I invite Elementary Schools of Hope to weigh in on this if you want, but, so Elementary Schools of Hope uses the AmeriCorps, see my phone bill. AmeriCorps, gotta pay my phone bill. The AmeriCorps, so there's a ongoing recruitment challenge around tutors, right? So, that's a fair question, and it is a trend question. In terms of performance, it's not really an issue. It's more of a long-term issue, but it is something that we're giving thought to. It's not something that we can say to you, next year we won't have a certain amount. Because there's always ongoing efforts to recruit and train tutors. That's part of what AmeriCorps is. That's the core of what it does. But so there is a thought to answer your question. There has been thought and deliberate intention and effort around recruiting, retaining good tutors. But what's I think more of a challenge has been when we do have tutors, making sure that they're being utilized efficiently and in the school, which is challenging because every school has a different culture, and there's the school day is different, so it's hard to plug in and define the time for those tutors. Yes.
No, we're going to do Ananda, then Kate, then Chris. We're going to go first, and then, okay. Yep.
So thank you for the presentation. What I was hoping to see prior to the next board meeting where we have to vote is some ways in which the partners are addressing what came from the WCER report. I really appreciate the report, specifically the framing around continuous improvement, and in some instances highlighted some of the opportunities, and others kind of gave some recommendations. So I think that would be helpful for a vote, and we don't need to take time on it. And I'll be happy to send you both some of the things that I...
Like you had specific questions on?
Specific questions
Yeah, please.
on it, but instead of just taking the time today. But they are like related to the continuous improvement suggested from the report.
Okay, if you want to send me those, or send it to Ricardo and he'll get it to me, and we'll respond to that.
Thank you, Astrid.
Yep.
I wanted to just ask a little bit about how we recruit students and what the plans are going forward around that. I noticed that the number of students enrolled has fallen pretty significantly for both elementary school and middle school over the last 3 years, and the number of tutoring hours is less than half as what it started as. And so I just, this is a three-year proposal, and the trend on enrollment isn't.
I think
like,
Laura.
I guess what are we doing to
Yeah, sure. Here, you know what? Let's get in front of the mic.
Okay, I'll sit here. Hi, my name is Laura Whitmore. I work to support all of the partners in the partnership department. And to address your question about how the students, the numbers of students that are being recommended is more a direct correlation to the time in the day that a student has for tutoring. And again, and much to like what I was talking about before, it is a matching game with when people can be available to tutor. So in each school and each of the programs, there's something else, there's something different going on. So with elementary, there's a lot, when there's a literacy block, it's just that time of the day when a student could receive literacy tutoring during that literacy block. And there's a sort of capacity. There might be 5 kids available that could receive tutoring, but to bring 5 more adults into that classroom just wouldn't work. And we also don't want to be pulling them out. And also when we have 1 AmeriCorps member and 5 students, that also doesn't really work. So that's not the case in every single school, but that's an example of some things that happen with this sort of matching. And it's just, I think that like every one of our programs has mentioned, it does get down to the time of a day and what a student is already receiving in services, and then where could tutoring fit in.
So how are we, I mean, that sounds like a new normal, not something, how are you guys, how are we going to address just,
Yeah, so some of that new rocket innovation that we were looking at, like looking at that model, does that model help address the needs of what the schools and the students have? So we want to really pilot that and be really thoughtful about what that could look like in the middle school level.
And then we will continue to work with CNI and teaching and learning and trying to identify times and places for when tutoring can happen and what that's supposed to look like.
So do we have too much? I mean, are we still staffed to support 2x the number of hours, or like how does that work?
What do you mean? I'm not
So
sure if I
the
understand your
number-
question.
The number of tutoring hours went down from like 2,500 a year to 1,000. So do we still have the same number of people working, but just working less? From a volunteer perspective, maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know.
Right, no, and yes, it would be, it's an interesting question to look at each school again. So district-wide, there's just been fewer students recommended that have time to do this, to have time to receive tutoring. And we have a lot of community volunteers that are ready to go and are willing to volunteer. It's just finding the time in the day. It's really ends up being the crux of it, is finding time in the day for the student to have this.
So I think what you're saying is that the lower number does not mean there's a lower need. It just means that there's lower availability in many cases to get that match.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if we're still resourcing it the same, though, with less engagement. So like from a budget and bodies and hours perspective, if we don't think we're gonna be able to address the need that's there, right, based on scheduling.
I think that it's how a school sets itself up. Let's just use the literacy block, for example, and how a teacher and interventionist at a school and tutors all work together can be a bit of a puzzle, right? I mean, your highest needs students that have the greatest amount of need are not necessarily the student that's going to go to the tutor right away first. That might be a student that maybe sees a teacher for reading group and then goes to interventionist, or does something else that's more targeted from maybe a reading specialist or highly certified staff member. So I think what you're asking is it's sort of, does it mean you have fewer tutors who are then tutoring more hours, or do you have more tutors tutoring fewer hours? Is that what you're getting at, Kate?
Yeah, and we can move on, we can get stuck on this. I'm just trying to figure out if this is the new normal, do we have the right resources, or do we
Yep.
actually need less resources, or can we use them for something else or in a different way that is a support to talent development for advanced learning, or a
Yep.
support to community.
Yep.
Chris?
Thanks so much for your presentation. One question I had was specifically about the two memorandum of agreement for these two programs. And, it was pretty clear that MAP and PALS are perhaps not the best ways to measure academic progress, but the MOAs both still say that every year we'll look at MAP and PALS to measure our academic progress. And I'm wondering if we should tweak the language there to give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of the measures we use. Because if we know these aren't working, why are we committing ourselves to these measures?
Yeah, I think the team was planning on explaining that is going to be changing soon, but they just haven't figured out the alternative yet. But I think softening the language is a good idea, Chris.
Yeah.
I like that.
So soften the language,
Yeah.
so
I
not to
think-
be specific.
So it doesn't have, if we find a formative assessment that works better than MAP, let's do it.
And I think part of it too, Chris, is we want to be sure we work with our partners to make sure we have the capacity to do something like this, which would then influence tutor training and monitoring. Our ways of working will likely be adjusted around that, and want to be sure we have ample opportunity to talk with our partners about all of those different pieces of partnership.
A second thing I wanted to bring up was the inconsistencies in student selection for tutoring across schools, which came out in the evaluation. And I'm wondering if we actually need to give more specific guidance about when a student needs an interventionist versus when a student needs a tutor, so that we get more consistency across schools. I mean, I like to give schools flexibility. I really believe in that, but this might actually be a situation where schools need to be told when kids get interventionists, and we also need to make sure schools have the interventionists allocated to meet the needs of the kids who need them.
I think you're totally right, Chris, and I'll go back to sort of the statement that I made earlier when we were preparing, right? A more robust monitoring system will lead to a more robust system of measuring progress. So I think that, there's lots of different ways, different kinds of support that a student can access. How you know which student needs exactly what is dependent on good data, right, that comes in and informs that. So that's noted. Thank you.
I think, and then my third point is specifically around, or question is specifically around tutors of color. It seems like we have really low numbers of tutors of color. I think at the elementary level, 95% of our tutors are white, and at the middle school level, I think it was 70. I think that was last year. But given how important the relationship building is as one of our outcomes in this program, could we be doing more to recruit and bring tutors of color into our schools for that relationship piece? Just seems like an opportunity to get more people of color into our buildings helping kids. So.
Yeah, I mean, I will never tell you that we should not be doing more to get more diversity, more perspective in our tutoring pool. One of the reasons why I think these partnerships are so valuable is because these organizations that we're partnered with are uniquely positioned to have reach into communities, to tap into pools of potential tutors, including tutors of color. So I would say yes, we definitely need to do more. And that's part of why I think it's important that these partnerships stay in place.
And but you're suggesting there may be something in the MOA.
I wonder if we actually want to have a goal.
A goal, like you're saying, a specific goal.
Like set a specific goal around getting more tutors of color into this program.
Yep. You know, back on your other point, Chris, about what was your second point? Yeah, there were three.
It was on the student selection.
Oh, the selection.
And the interventionist versus the tutor.
Thank you, Nikki. I think it was 4 years ago or so. We were in this room and we worked hard on creating the tutoring framework. I'm looking at Annalee because she was a big part of that process, and we had fairly robust debates about exactly this question, like what are the set of criteria and who are the students who are, most likely to benefit from tutoring, and how can we be more strategic about freeing up the teacher or the interventionist to work with the students who most need a teacher or interventionist working with them as opposed to a tutor, right? Like there was some real logic. So that exists, and that's why I pointed out, like we have that set of criteria. If there is still variation among schools, it must be because they're choosing not to use the criteria or apply it. Maybe this gets back to your analogy to the game and all the moving pieces.
Tetris matching.
Yeah, the Tetris matching. But that I need to point out the tutoring framework is very good. It's research-based, best practice-based. We have a lot of alignment to it, but this seems like one of the areas where there is a mismatch, and I would be very curious about why, right? If the criteria exist, why are schools choosing not to apply them? And it may just get back to the time constraints. And we've tightened up our literacy block significantly over the years, which is why Kate is pointing out this question, right? It's a good thing, right? It's a good thing, which is I think in part why we're doing the kind of experimentation we are with middle schools of hope, right? Is there a better way to use those resources and get even better outcomes as a result? So our thinking is right where you are, Kate. We don't want to mess with a tighter literacy block. That is a good thing. We don't want to pull students out of core instruction, right? That's not a good idea. And I think we were doing a lot of that, maybe, at least in the early days. It was different. So there may be another strategy, another route that we'll have to figure out over time.
I think we also need to stay open to the possibility that schools may not just be making a conscious choice not to implement this framework with fidelity, but actually they may not have enough allocations for interventionists, or scheduling might be so rigid that they can't do it. Like, what are we not providing so that they can follow the framework?
This is why we have to ask the questions. I think that's right, Chris. Yeah, I don't want to make any assumptions about that.
Okay, just wait. What kind of question?
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Literacy box, what year did we officially start doing the, like, had 3 people emailed me and asked on the, so I said I would ask.
Well, I think there's always been
There's
like
always
a
been the
literacy
90
block.
Okay, we're going to stay on
Uh-huh.
topic for this, and
Nikki, I'll
can
get
you
back
guys
to you on
follow
that.
up on email? Okay, Ali, still your first comment?
Thank you all so much for presenting. I'm a huge Vintage Moss fan. And I think in terms of whether or not a student needs an interventionist or a tutor, I'm wondering if we're able to compare what produces the best outcomes in terms of students. So what are the outcomes we're seeing when we're looking at students who have access to a tutor versus the outcomes we're seeing when students have access to intervention? What happens when a student has both? And is there room for self-advocacy? So are students saying, I would like a tutor, or I would like to work with somebody, or I would like to work one-on-one in this area, and is that being accommodated?
Good question.
I think that's in large part what we're doing with this Middle Schools of Hope prototype, Ali. I mean, it is about students advocating for themselves. I think we're learning that that kind of agency produces better outcomes. So more to come on that, but yeah, do you want to add?
Yeah, and I would add that at the older grades, so middle schools and our high school programs, the students are actually self-advocate. They're advocating to have this as a service. Their parents are also involved. In elementary, it's a little more directed by the teacher, figuring out, because the teacher knows what the student needs in a particular subject as well as their schedule. And I keep coming back to the student's schedule is so very important. The teacher knows that the best. Whereas when they're a little bit older, we can look in IC and see when they have a study hall or when there's other times that are available.
Yeah, so looking at kind of the first part of my question, do we have information about results via pairing a student with a tutor, results pairing a student with an interventionist, results that we get when a student has both? And what I really would like to get away from is the idea that it's either or, right? That some kids, that we're going to create this profile of a kid who would benefit from a tutor, and we're going to create this profile of a kid who would benefit from an intervention, versus like, are there kids who benefit from both? Are we seeing kids working with tutors, doing better in specific areas? What does that look like in terms of outcome? And it's okay if we don't have that information, but if we're going to make decisions about who is where or who gets referred to what, I think we would need to do that from a pretty informed place.
I think your point is taken about, are there kids that benefit from both? And then the question I would then later ask on the evaluation end is, how do you isolate the impact of when kids get both? How do I know it was the intervention versus the tutor that had the result? It gets into a game. I mean,
Right, but wouldn't we treat
challenge?
the kids who didn't have both as the control group for the kids who do have both, right? You'd say, oh, we're looking at the kids who have both. We're seeing the greatest outcomes from those kids. That means that when it's multi-layered, or we're seeing that contradicts, and that the kids who have just this are the kids who are excelling to the greatest extent. And I'm not saying there wouldn't be diversity within that range. I'm just saying, do we have access to that information?
Right. Good question.
I've been a tutor in Schools of Hope. I love just the idea of the partnerships with such strong organizations like the Urban League and Centro, the school district, the United Way, AmeriCorps, all those things. But it's really difficult after all of these years to look and see no academic improvement in outcomes. And it's not because people aren't working hard or don't have the right intentions or all of these things. But I like to hear we're looking at how we reimagine the middle school, but the status quo for none of us is acceptable when we come to reading proficiencies or math proficiencies for students of color. And I think we have to look at our partnerships and to also say that the status quo is not good enough, and that I'm all for renewing this, and I won't be on the board when it comes back 3 years from now, but we got to push more. I mean, we have to say that this is not acceptable to just keep because everyone likes it, that it's good enough. But I haven't seen, there's a lot to wade through here. I didn't see anything in the data snapshots that showed any impact for students being in this program versus not being in these programs in terms of academic outcome. And so I think we have to start, and whether it's fidelity to the tutoring model, whether it's an issue with how you match kids up, whatever, I'd rather see a really strong impact on 250 kids than I would be to see no academic impact on 1,000 students. And so whatever the model is, I would say it's not good enough. And I would push ourselves, our partners, to reimagine and say, step back and say, we have to. And this board, I would say, should hold all of us accountable when this comes up 3 years from now to say, we expect that there will be academic progress made for students in this program. And maybe there's no way that students with 15 sessions over a year are going to have academic progress.
Can I respond to that,
Yeah.
Mary? I appreciate the push. No one here is clinging to the status quo.
I know that.
And I think, I just have been in so many conversations with Anna Lee on this topic, a lot, over many years now. And I think part of what we're banging our heads against, what sometimes feels like we're banging our heads against on this particular set of partnerships, is the fact that we're using a faulty measure. That we're not valuing enough the fact that non-cognitive skills matter, and that tutoring partnerships, mentoring partnerships, or any combination of those things do produce academic outcomes, but they're not MAP scores. We've got to find a better way to measure the non-cognitive skills that students attain through those relationships. And I'm with Lisa. There are some finer grained measures that would show exactly what it is that students are learning as a result of tutoring partnerships. So I would just say that first. I think it's incredibly important, and it's this obsession that we all have in seeing purely academic results on a single test that keeps us stuck sometimes, and it masks the fact that we may be actually having much more impact than we realize we're having. The second point that I have on that is, and we have to show through these new MOAs that we are actually taking all the lessons learned from the evaluation and applying them to the next round. I don't think that's clear enough yet. We just talked about that earlier today.
So Jen, on that point, then can you tell me, because where on the evaluation do I see the impact on non-cognitive?
You don't, because we don't.
Well then it's not, we are, as a board, we actually, our role is to be responsible. And so then I think the MOAs and the work need to do that. They need to have that. And you can't expect, certainly as a board member, I can't just say, oh, well, it's a belief.
I'm in agreement. We're not in an argument there. This is our job, right? We have to figure out what the better measures are if we're going to know what we need to change or keep about these long-standing.
So how do we, and Ananda, can I just finish on this point? So, should we only approve this for 1 year? and come back with those, what can we expect? When is that going to happen, and how does that come back to the board? Because if we don't have the right measures in here, and we're not showing, then what are we in fact approving?
That's a good question. I think you're improving the programmatic improvements that are coming out of the evaluation. This is my take on it. Pending a larger discussion around finding measures that are more sensitive to the actual program itself. So I don't know if you guys want to add to that.
Okay, it's actually Nikki, because she waited because she had already spoken, and then Ananda.
And then Ahmad has one.
Okay.
As Chris was saying before, and I would think is similar, is there a way, I always forget to turn on the mic. Sorry, thanks, Ananda. Is there a way to possibly standardize, not completely standardize, but create a rubric on each school on selection criteria, just to make it more knowledgeable to the public, make it more knowledgeable to the teachers, make it more knowledgeable to everyone who's involved, possibly? And my second that's my first question. My second one is, how do, on ESL data, how do we make sure that that we continue to see the growth? We're seeing it, but how do we continue that? Those are my thoughts.
So I think I heard a couple of things. I'm going to answer your questions, Nikki. So I agree with you. I think there needs to be some sort of greater definition around student selection at schools. I heard that as a need, and I saw it come out of the evaluation. I think we need to refresh and sort of recommit to the fidelity of the tutoring model that we developed and that we have in place. I think in terms of your ESL question, Nikki, right, that's about when you assess what student needs are. If a student needs some language support, we would want to be sure that that came through in the needs assessment and that we followed through so that a student could be successful. I wouldn't want a student that actually needed explicit language support to not have that, or wouldn't be worth their time, right? So, and then I also think, so we talked about fidelity to the tutoring model, greater definition to a student selection process, and then implementation of a more sensitive curriculum-based and non-cognitive screener or progress monitoring tool moving forward. So I think those are the pieces that we would want to, we wanted to talk to you about, that we want to develop in the MOAs that will come forward for approval at the end of the month.
On the screener, is there a way we can get one that's for nonverbal? I know I've said this many times, but PALS, if you can't speak, if you have hard time with that, it's hard to be able to truly justify where they're at.
Gotcha. Yep.
Ananda, if you don't mind, Ahmad hasn't spoken yet. I'm trying to get the first-time speakers first.
On the selection criteria, are you thinking selecting based on academic or non-academic criteria?
Well, I think it would be based on what the school needs were, and it would be both, I think. I think it would be both, right? It's both academic need and also social and emotional needs that might come up for students.
And I think if we're putting an emphasis on looking at the non-cognitive outcomes, then the measures that we use to get the students into the program should also reflect.
Pre and post, absolutely. Yep. Thank you.
Ananda?
Thank you, Mary. I actually wanted to lift Mary's concern, but pivoting, because I'm someone that don't think that standardized testing captures the brilliance of our youth, in particular non-traditional youth and youth that have a much greater resilience. We do not have actually a tool that measure resilience. But I will say that it was surprising, as someone that has actually been a Juventud coordinator in the past and worked for both Urban League and Centro Hispano, it was surprising to see that the opportunities were very similar than how many gazillions of years ago, I was working at Centro. And to me, that was what it felt. So I just wanted to add to Mary's concern about that's. So I sent an email to Ricardo with some of the things that came out of the report, just looking at like what are some of the things that moving forward we can feel confidence that is shifting. So we're not doing more of the same thing.
That makes sense.
Okay, Jen, I mean, yeah, sure.
I think, I mean, I definitely want Astra and the team to be able to go back and lift up what exactly we're going to be doing different as a result of this most recent evaluation. I think on the metrics, I mean, I appreciate your 1 year suggestion, and I would like to see the board do the 3-year renewal. I mean, these partnerships are there's just so much there to work with. I would never want to send a message that they're somehow in jeopardy, but I think it'd be interesting to put a deadline on developing that new set of metrics rather than just having soft language saying by the end of the.
Yeah, I think
first year.
I think to me that's what I would look at is really a year by year, so we're not just back here and say like this is, and it encompasses the developments or improvements year by year around those, around development of metrics.
Does that seem possible, you guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll go to work. If you have more questions, please let us know.
Okay. Yeah, Gloria.
Just quickly, I'm just, I've reviewed the materials. I'm just wondering, like, hearing from our partners,
Yeah.
right? I mean, who are actually seeing this day to day, I mean, would be really worthwhile. I mean, the quantitative data is great, but I would really like to hear from our partners on this, whether, it be in a report on what they're seeing and what trends and what they want to see in the future.
Okay.
Are you
That's
suggesting
it.
now?
No. No, I just, in the
Yeah, at
future.
some point. Yeah, in the
So
future.
you're
I mean,
saying you
we don't
want
have
to
to do
hear
that now.
a report, like a presentation from the partners, or what are you saying?
Not really, in a narrative report is fine. I mean, I just,
Oh, like a report from the partners on their
Yeah.
experience.
The end of year
That's-
reports.
Is it
that
in
you-
here?
That's what the end of your report is.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the mid-year.
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Those are in the.
I'd like to hear
Okay.
from
Yeah.
them. I mean, I read the report, but I'd also like, and I forgot to ask. I'm sorry.
I'm wondering, because, I'm sorry.
No,
Just-
I.
Well,
went out of turn.
okay, I just want to stay on
Sorry
what
about that, Mary.
this is coming
Sorry.
at the end of the meeting. The partners are right here right now. If people have specific questions for them, I would say we should take 10, 15 minutes and do that right now.
Okay, I'd like to hear from.
Okay. Okay.
Want to start?
So,
with-
are there specific questions on?
Just quickly, I mean, you've heard.
Hello.
Hello.
Can I
You
say
wanna
I just love
introduce-
this board? Sorry. I took like 3 pictures that I will tweet about later. Yeah.
So, given the conversation that we've just had, like, I really just want to hear from your perspective, really. I mean, I think oftentimes we are so disconnected when we're making these decisions to what's happening day to day, and just wanted to get your perspective.
Well, I think one thing that has to be, that's been underestimated is that the perception of after-school programs in the schools. I don't know if this board really understands the change that Jen, under her leadership and creating the strategic framework and where we all fit in, really did. I think for a long time, school-based programming and after-school-based programming, for what I've heard before coming here, it's been very separate. And so I think one of the larger challenges is making sure that they're integrated and seamless. This issue of referrals is very important to all the partners, because I know for Centro, we would love to get more teacher referrals. We get them, but we need to get more of them. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that they're understanding the true purpose of after-school programming, those non-cognitive factors. We're not just supplanting when they need a helper in the classroom because they're overwhelmed, which is a likely thing. But we actually have a purpose in the schools. And I think when that happens, we're going to be able to get the referrals that we need for our programming to be successful. I think there's a lot of seamless work that needs to happen, and I'm really excited that over the next 5 years we will get there. I also think it has a lot to do with how teachers and staff are understanding the demographic shifts in our schools, the issues that we're facing around racial equity, Black excellence. These are all issues that are coming up right now, and after-school programs are a key partner to that work. So it's a lot to kind of unpack and make sure that that is happening at the same time. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, okay.
Can I just, Karen, I want to respond to, I mean, your comment for me really resonates with something Ellie said earlier, which is how do these things fit together, right? So like where does intervention fit in, where does tutoring fit in from you versus the various other kind of, like whether it's in school or out of school. And I just wonder, I mean, it feels like we're talking about a kind of big strategic shift from literacy and math impact to potentially non-academic or academic and. I wonder if it makes sense to just take, I mean, and acknowledge in the MOA that the next 12 months is about how is the puzzle. I mean, you guys are talking about Tetris from a scheduling perspective, but I can imagine this, I mean, I know I kind of maybe flippantly mentioned advanced learning earlier, but for me, like, we've got a great set of resources in a building that can support challenging kids wherever they're at. And there's a way that that could fit together with a broader set of children and add value and build relationships in ways that we aren't able to support right now. And I just wonder if we put more, we're already talking about kind of a goal shift, essentially. I wonder if you could put a little bit more into the other forms of intervention in a day and lay that out clearly for staff, if it would both more clearly impact results, but also support kind of leveraging. I mean, it's a significant amount of resources, guys, and a really smart set of people in our community that we should be using to the best of our ability.
Yeah, and I have to say that we see the impact day in and day out in the work that we do. As Gloria mentioned, I think making sure we have the right measures and the right system in place to ramp that up even more would be the goal.
And we're also talking about, I mean, I think we're talking about literally having the objective of this program be slightly different than what's written in the MOA, which means we need different measures, but we also need to all be clear on, well, what are we trying to do?
I do want to say, too, that Centros programs are very different from Urban League and Elementary School of Hope, so I want to make sure that, you know, give space for that.
Ed, did you want to be up here and respond? Nikki?
You were, Karen, you were mentioning, mentioning that you don't get as many teacher referrals. Who is the major referrer of students?
Parents and our youth's agency. They're the ones who are saying that they want to be a part of a small learning community that makes them feel like they're more engaged and that they belong. And so we're seeing a lot of our school engagement measures that we keep track of are really significant. And we've seen over the last, I think, 3 years, a change in how the school staff itself perceives our programming, which I think is a huge win in a space where after-school programming was seen as so separate from in-school programming. So I think there's significant progress. It's just making sure that we're addressing it the right way.
Thank you.
So, yeah, Ed, did you, so I don't know if people know Ed Lee from the Urban League, with regards to the questions that had been raised, either from Gloria or Nikki, did you want to, from an Urban League perspective?
I'll say a few things, I think. First of all, I know Ruben had a long-standing speaking engagement tonight, so he would normally have preferred to be here, I know. So he apologizes for having to leave. But, you know, a lot to digest in the conversation tonight, and nothing particularly surprising. I mean, these are all things that we've been talking about as, you know, as the results of the evaluation have come in and the recommendations from WCER. So I think, you know, there's a lot of opportunity for us. You know, I don't think we're averse to change. But just a couple of thoughts on a few things. One is this student selection question. I think we feel pretty good about who we're serving. I mean, I think we feel like we are getting to students that need us. And, as Jen said, we've sort of grappled with this question a lot over the years. And I think, we sort of always try to land at this place of some flexibility in part, I think, to the point that Ali, you made about like student advocacy. If we put in place such a strict selection rubric, then I think we lose some of that opportunity for students to say, like, this is something I want to participate in. And then what? We have to turn them away because they don't fit the perfect rubric that we've set out. So, like, these are the questions, like, in the school that we're grappling with, and what sort of lead us, I think, to land where we've kind of landed in selection. I would agree wholeheartedly that, it's not that we're not striving for an academic impact, but, MAP is not necessarily the only way to capture that, right? Like, so we're kind of beholden to this metric that, in fact, we don't even get mad. Like, our staff and our tutors know nothing about students' MAP assessment. So we're sort of trying to tailor programming to an assessment that we don't have any information about. So I'm really excited about, some of what Lisa had shared about some other ways that we might get at measuring some academic impact in a more nuanced way than just the MAP assessment. We absolutely want to be responsive to the schools, and we feel, we get a lot of good feedback. I think, I think if we were to walk out of the schools today and stop doing what we do, I think there would be a void that some way, shape, or form would get filled by another tutoring program. I think it's a need that we hear. We do surveys of students every year. The feedback we get from them is really positive about the experience they have in the program, the motivation they feel from being matched with a volunteer, the positive, just the positive that the students get from it. We hear that from them directly. Same thing from staff. So, I would just say we take all this in, and we are, we're excited about what's happening with Rocket. So, we want to explore new options, ways to enhance what we're doing. But at the end of the day, I think, back to Jen's point about the relationships that we bring, that extra bit of time on academic task, I think all of those are really important. So, I don't know if that helps.
Okay, so just quickly finishing, Ananda?
Go ahead.
I can very quickly. Hi, my name is Emily Enders Green. I am a director with Elementary Schools of Hope, and I think we echo a lot of what's already been said. So I just want to say, from our perspective, we are school day based. So the tutoring that happens with Elementary Schools of Hope happens within a school day, which has challenges, but is also super positive. Allows us to be in alignment with curriculum and have teacher input. And I think the one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet that I think really impacts us is, as you mentioned, our Schools of Hope has been around for a while. I actually started my Schools of Hope journey as an AmeriCorps Vista member at Leopold Elementary School in 2001. And so even I can see how different schools are. And as a parent of 2 Leopold children, I appreciate the literacy block, and I understand that that's best for my kids, but it's caused a lot of challenges for this tutoring program. And so we have to look at something that was created 20 years ago. How do we change it and mold it and make it still fit the needs of the school? And I think that's where this resources, we don't want to have resources that aren't going to schools. We have volunteers in the elementary school that we can't place because we just can't find the match. So we're sometimes different, but we all are very different programs. We all are trying to do the same thing for students. And so it is really important to understand the differences between the programs and to understand the different challenges that we have. But for us, it really is, and I think that's something we want to do this year, is think about, okay, what are the school needs? We know our AmeriCorps members who are in this building full-time are really valued members of the school staff. They bring in really great volunteers, but how do we make sure that they're having a good year? That's my job. And, there's been a lot of challenges, and sometimes, they don't have tutoring. They're in the building all the time and can't find children to tutor because of schedules or literacy blocks. So I think, we know that's the new normal, and we just want to make sure that we're using our resources in the best way possible. And so we totally hear what you're saying. That's what we talk about on literally a weekly basis, are all of these same challenges. So yeah, I think we're all ready to kind of reconsider and relook at how we measure and best practices and how we want Schools of Hope to look moving forward.
Okay, just wrapping it up. Any last questions?
Yeah.
Ananda and then Chris.
Thank you all. It's great to see you too, Karen. I was just wondering if, because I know, Mary, you made a suggestion around the yearly contract. I understand very well the negative impact that would have on our partners. So I actually wouldn't support the 1 year, but I do support some forms of check-in. But instead of us telling you all how that check-in should happen, I think that should be like you all tell us how that happens. And I also would encourage my fellow board members to also visit the sites and learn about because I feel like I've experienced all of that either directly being an employee or indirectly through my daughter. So, but I think that, I also a lot has changed and improved. So just also making that call. So thank you.
Okay, Chris.
So I really appreciate your comments. I think one of the things that dawned on me as you were talking is that we really have to be systems thinkers when it comes to Schools of Hope and how it fits into both our schools and broader, how it fits into the community, and also Juventud and Escalera. There's a whole system of things that helps our children achieve. 15 hours of tutoring is not going to actually raise MAP score significantly by itself. It's how things like instruction, tutoring, interventions, school climate and culture all work together to lift up our kids, as well as all the things that are happening outside of school, which you guys actually have your fingers on the pulse of. So for that reason, I actually think we should enter into a 3-year agreement. I agree with you, Ananda, and I love the idea of you guys coming back to us and talking to us about what's, especially, from the perspective of the big picture of kids' lives and what's happening in their lives and in their world outside of school, making sure we're paying attention to that when we think about the whole system that we have to affect to help kids achieve.
Okay, so we're going to wrap it up. I will clarify, I proposed or mentioned a 1 year just so we can have some accountability on what is going to change and the address. I prefer a 3-year. I'd just like to see some definition of what happens year by year in the MOA to reflect these changes that we're all talking about but need to be reflected within the thing. Okay, so with that, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you for all your work.
And I will move to adjourn. Thank you. Ahmad, your advisor vote? Aye. All in favor? Aye. Okay, we're adjourned.
Okay.
with subgroups of these different, to address the different issues. Hopefully then, we will reach consensus on a lot of these items, and we hope to bring those back to you in the fall, hopefully like late October, to get your approval. Any changes that we're looking at generally apply to then the subsequent school year. So the items that we're going to be talking about this summer would be applying for the 2021 school year, unless we agreed we wanted them to apply sooner. Do you want to just chime in on the equity tool piece at this point?
So typically our timeline is we start usually in June, depending on the year and depending on the number of items that we have up for discussion. We like to typically close out and bring the language changes to the board sometime in the fall, usually October. There are times where the subcommittees have to continue their conversations, and those may go into the next school year. It's just dependent on how much and how robust the conversations are, and the challenges that we may have coming to some consensus. So just know that the list that you currently see in front of you may or may not come to you in its totality once we get to that point. I think another area of note is this year we're going to be working through the equity tool, the use of the equity tool through this process to help really guide decision making. There are certainly items that are on this list that are challenging and have inequities, sort of unintentional inequities built into them. And so we really want to be able to use our equity tool that was designed to really help us understand who's benefiting, who's being burdened by the language changes, et cetera. So just know that as we move through this process, as a executive MMSD joint MTI committee, that will be taking a look at using that equity tool as well.
So just high-level overview, some of the items that we would like to be addressing include planning time and high school scheduling. And the planning time is really at the secondary level. This is something we have been working on for the last year, and we continue to work on trying to reach an understanding and a resolution that meets everybody's needs. So that has been an ongoing committee, and we're just want to continue that work. Another issue that we would like to be looking at is our processes for hiring support staff, and this is something where we are looking in the handbook in general. If you've looked at it, it's extremely long. So we are looking to align things to make them more uniform across all employee units to the extent we can. And here's one of those areas where we would like to have the hiring process similar to that for teachers, where you look at internal and external candidates simultaneously. Because currently we only use that process for the teacher unit, but not for the support staff units. Around compensation, we would like to continue to explore modifications to the salary schedules to create more uniformity across schedule movement. We've had this conversation how in certain units they're frozen for a certain period of time, but where in others they're not. They move every year. Mm-hmm. So again, we're looking to have some uniformity across how all employee groups are treated. Same thing with regard to snow days, how those are handled vary greatly across employee units. So again, huge issue this year. So we're looking to have, again, some uniformity, so it's not this employee group gets this and this employee group gets that, and it creates a lot of confusion and hard feelings. So, that's something we need to look at as well. On the benefit side, only the teacher unit has sick leave bank, but now everybody has access to short-term disability insurance, which we never had before. So that's something that we, again, want to look at on that whole issue of uniformity. And another issue that's come up is how we treat different employees across units for when they become eligible for benefits. What's 50% versus 19 hours or less for the hourly people, and it doesn't, because 50% if you're salaried is 40, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, it's another equity area where groups aren't being treated the same, and we want to have some uniformity. In the substitute teacher unit, there's this very convoluted language in there around how you move from being a long-term sub to an extended long-term sub, and it's very confusing for people who read it. They don't understand it, and even though we understand it, it's really hard to monitor the way that it's at, and it's an issue that causes a lot of problems, because once you become an extended long-term sub, you're eligible for benefits. So we want to make sure that we're doing it correctly. So we want to come up with a process that's clearer and easier to implement. And teacher surplus, there's a typo in this, just so that you know, but we want to modify the surplus process so that it is not based solely on seniority. And the concern we have around that in the teacher unit now is people are really working hard to diversify their staff. So a lot of the staff that they end up having come in are the least senior. So then when they have a surplus, those are the staff who they've really worked hard to recruit and get in their building, and those are the ones who we have to surplus because it's based solely on seniority. So we think there's got to be a better system. And so those are the topics we're looking to explore.
Heidi, that last one, that's across units as well, the surplus issue?
Yes.
Right?
Mhm.
Because the other, just to add a little layer on there, we hear a lot from SEAs, for
Mhm.
example, where building a strong relationship with the student is so critical, and SEAs get surplused and bumped around from school to school a lot. So it's an issue in other units as well.
I think the only other thing that I would add to this is that some of these topics obviously are pretty complex topics. They're going to be topics that require data collection and a little bit more understanding. So it will just be dependent on how far we get in the process of this discussion. Some of these topics, the benefits eligibility as an example, we may just be opening that up for discussion. We may not come to resolution this cycle. There are obviously topics also that have budget implications. So we'll be sure to share all of that information with you as we're moving forward, which is also part of the timeline, providing the board with some updates on how we're progressing.
Great. Thank you. Nikki?
Just two questions, one question, one statement. On the substitute teacher thing, would that also include, so that's all units, like a long-term sub versus extended long-term sub on the snow days? I know that was a real huge issue. That would all be included on the snow day discussion. All groups would be?
Yes.
And my other one, this is my statement. I think the work is great on almost everything. The one way you will lose me, I'm going to be blatant on this, is to get rid of the teacher sick bank. That I just going to tell you my line right now.
Okay. Ananda?
Thank you for this. Appreciate the summary. I'm wondering if we would have access to the staff survey that asks some of the questions around their own priorities and values around some of the things that you're changing? Or can we have a summary of that?
Of the MTI survey, Ananda, is that right?
When I was here, I filled out a survey that asked, like, what keeps you here? Like, is it what you value? Is it salary?
Compensation survey.
Yes.
We just did it that one year when we did the compensation study.
Oh, it's not yearly?
It's not yearly.
Is it,
Yeah, but we
is
can
it,
go back.
is
It's only
it
from a
new
couple
enough?
years.
Because it's only been a couple years that we could
It's fairly
see.
recent, the comp survey, maybe?
Yeah, it would have been, I think, 2016 that we did that. So we could certainly share those
That would be
survey
Yeah.
results if you
Yeah.
guys are interested in seeing that.
Because that was was that sent to everyone, right? In every category as
Yeah,
well?
And there were some focus groups with teachers as well. I think that's
Yeah, I would love
worth
to
resurfacing.
see by category specifically, like what are the differences, if anything.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry, who's next? Oh, Chris, sorry.
So I'm just curious, this is just my lack of knowledge as a new board member, but does AFSCME have a seat at the table during these conversations in the same role that MTI and other certified unions, or not?
No, they do not.
They do not.
Well, I'm not saying they do. Yes, they do, but to the extent that the issues involve them, if that makes any sense.
So, I'm
So,
just-
for example, the support staff hiring process, they would be involved in all of those discussions because that impacts them. Same thing like with snow days or the compensation.
Do they have the capacity to add things to the list if they have concerns that you haven't put on the list?
Yes.
Okay, so they are part of that conversation,
Mhm.
they can add stuff?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that's all I wanted to know, is to make sure.
Yep.
That even though they're not certified, they can still do that.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm happy to hear that you're going to take this through Equity Lens. That's great. So just asking for us to sort of, when you present back to us, what process you took and report back on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything, Kate?
I'm not, Heidi, I'm not sure if I caught your explanation at the beginning. Is this the total list of topics that was raised, or is this gone, I guess, are there items that aren't on this list to tackle that have been raised at some point from?
Good question.
Our
Meaning like, does MTI have another list?
Yes.
Right, longer and than this? MTI may have additional items that they will want to bring to the table too.
So this list is from?
Is from
That's
us
our-
and things that we are things that, it's from us, items that we've actually had conversations with MTI about, some of them, not all of them. And like, for example, the planning time and high school scheduling is just an ongoing, meeting group. For example, I know that there's a special ed group that meets all the time. Have I heard, Peg? So have I heard from that group that they have specific items in the handbook they want to address? I have not at this point heard that. But-
So is there an opportunity for us to get visibility into if there is a longer list out there, just before we kind of send you on your way? I just want to make sure we're starting with as complete of a list of items for discussion.
Yeah, so part of the process and part of this timeline is once we've heard from the board, then it is our intent and our plan as part of our timeline to meet and have the discussion about, here's the draft timeline and here is the draft of the.
Discussion topics.
Yes, and then so we can certainly share that back, the full list, in a weekly update, or however it is that you guys would like to have it back, we can share that with you.
That would be super helpful. And then, I mean, we have a long night tonight. I don't want to go into a long discussion. Could you just maybe take like 4 sentences on planning time of where we're at on that? Just, it's big enough topic.
So, just like historically, at the secondary level, there is nothing set saying teachers get X amount of individual planning time. And so that's kind of the issue, adding some language to the handbook, saying here is the bare minimum of individual planning time that you are guaranteed. It's a little different now because all the high schools are going to be the same. They're going to be 7-period days. But as part of this concern about individual planning time, there's also a conversation that's going as to maybe setting time within the high school day for there to be common planning time. And so then that would negate some of this concern around people impinging on individual planning time because we'll have actually set aside this time for this common planning time. So it's, those two things are kind of intertwined.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what we're trying to figure out.
Okay.
Ali?
Yes, so I have a question specific to Matt in terms of navigating conflict of interest around this and it being specific to units. So if a unit is striving towards uniformity with teachers, do I have a conflict in terms of that unit once they become uniform or as during that process? Right, so if a unit, if custodial staff is different from teaching staff, custodial staff wants steps and lanes, am I allowed to vote on that until they're uniform?
I want to think about that a little bit more because it's not just about whether you would personally benefit and how you would personally benefit. So I would want to talk to you about that a little bit, probably more individually. So is that all right?
Yeah,
it's a,
I'm just,
it's
I'm
a punt
curious
for now,
about.
but yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm curious about that level of separation
Yeah.
within this conversation.
Yeah, okay, yeah, let's have that discussion.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, I wanted to, Gloria, I really appreciate your comments about looking at this through an equity lens, and I just would like a little more clarification about what it might look like to look at planning time through an equity lens, because changing common planning time and individual planning time does have the potential to impact what the school day looks like, I think. Like, in particular, I'm a little bit concerned about the time that teachers have every day at lunch and before school and after school to spend helping kids. And I think part of the equity lens we need to look at planning time around is if we're taking time away from teachers to provide that assistance to students in a flexible way, that could actually impact equity for kids who don't have access to help at home or don't have access to help through other channels. So I think, Gloria, again, I really appreciate your saying that, and I hope that looking at this through an equity lens isn't just about the staff, but also about the impact it might have on children, particularly children of color in our schools.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of the tool, is that the questions are open-ended, that it really engages people to think broadly like that. So it is not just specific to teachers and staff, but when you're asking questions about who's burdened, who benefits, it helps people think holistically about the full school community. So, and I'll say that up to this point, like last year when we started this process, we weren't focused on the equity tool. This year, we've had a lot of discussion, and we made the decision going forward that as we begin this process for this year, that we will be using the equity tool as a part of it. So we certainly can fold in the planning time as a part of this review cycle to be able to have that conversation and use that tool to help inform the planning time discussion.
And then my other comment at this point is that I would actually, as a board member, advocate to take the sick leave bank off the list. I don't think we should be taking that benefit away from our staff, so.
Okay, Ali?
Can I ask, how attached are we to the results any operation generates? And so if we're talking about planning time, do we have a sense that this amount of planning time yields the greatest results for students or educators? How do we navigate that in terms of negotiation?
I'm not following the question.
So if you are saying, hey, we're going to increase planning time, is there any way that we're looking and saying, when an educator has 2 hours of planning time in the day, we see this improvement in terms of youth engagement, this improvement in terms of, classroom management, we see less, issues in terms of behavior, teachers are sick less frequently. What attachment do we have to we're going to make these changes because they're going to promote these outcomes?
And I think that's kind of the data piece that we're talking about. We need to pull data for a lot of these to see what, how that fits, especially within the equity tool as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the team has done that up to this point.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't know. They might have to some extent. I mean, there certainly is research about common planning time and best practices that they've been leaning on.
Right.
Can we just pause? I know we have a lot on the agenda,
Yeah.
but just real quick on the sick leave bank. I've heard from 2 board members now that they would not support moving forward, and I just want to make sure everyone understands. Is it worthy of having any more discussion on that? Can you explain a little bit more what the intent behind that? Just say a few more words about it, Heidi.
Sure.
What is the problem we're trying to solve?
It's the only group that has sick leave bank is teachers.
Yeah.
Nobody else has sick leave bank. We have since gotten short-term disability insurance that's now available to all employees.
Which was the purpose of the sick leave bank.
Which was the purpose of the sick leave bank, because there was no short-term disability insurance. We now have short-term disability insurance. So all the other groups of employees can get short-term disability insurance. We don't have it for the teachers because there's the sick leave bank. So it's to have a conversation around, that's what the purpose of the sick leave bank was. Now there's short-term disability insurance that's available to everyone. Why should we not just have it be short-term disability insurance for everyone? It's a conversation to have, because the way the sick leave bank is funded is teachers have to contribute to it. It's not
Their sick leave
voluntary.
time.
They have to, so a brand-new teacher, they get 10 sick days, except one is taken away and put in the sick leave bank. So for every brand-new teacher, a day is put in the sick leave bank, their day is taken away. And we monitor the bank, and then at certain points when the bank gets below a certain amount, then we take a sick day from every employee, every teacher to
fund the bank.
basically refund the bank. So it's just a conversation that.
That did not seem simple.
It didn't seem simple in English either.
All right,
Can I suggest that we get like a one-pager
yeah,
and a
can we
weekly
just-
update about this
yeah.
subject so that we can actually understand with
Yeah.
some numbers maybe?
Would that help you, Ananda?
Yeah, so the
Yeah.
purpose
That
of.
would help me too.
Yes, and the purpose of having the conversation is to make sure that there's equity and fairness for everyone. We don't want teachers to be disadvantaged, and we don't want other staff to. And because we have short-term disability now, it becomes the universal, uniform benefit that everybody can get. But we will get you a one-pager.
But the intent is not to take away.
Correct.
I think that's what I'm worried
Yeah.
about right
Yes.
now. The intent is to figure out how to make sure everyone
One is
has access to
the
the
same.
benefits.
Yes.
So that if they need to go on leave short-term.
And
they
not have it
can.
impact their sick time.
Right.
Which it
Thanks,
is currently
yeah,
impacting.
thanks for
So
that
we can get
clarification.
a one-pager.
Yeah.
Can I just ask what they get the report, to be put in the report?
Sure.
How much the copay is, if any, on short-term disability, and how much it'll cost the average teacher?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, okay. All right, I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. So, motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Oh, Ahmad, your advisory board? All right.
Wait, we're just gonna go into close.
So don't we have to adjourn and then go into?
Actually, you can accept a motion to go into closed.
Oh, gotcha, okay. All right, I was chopping it up, sorry. All right, so can I get a motion to go into close?
There's actually really specific.
I know, yeah, I see that. I thought we had to close it and then.